you could sure watch it on YouTube and kind of that would eliminate some of the clutter on my screen. That would be helpful to us. Again, I'll introduce myself. My name is Charlie Moore. I'm the director of the Wyoming Gaming Commission. Joining me on the call here is Mike Kaler from the Attorney General's office. I also have joining us from our office, Nick Laramendi, who is our
the speakers on these laptops
enforcement.
Terrible. Like I can't even.
And if you would please mute your phones and mute your connections, everybody, that would be helpful. I also have joining us this morning in their consulting capacity with the agency, we have Kevin Mullally from Gaming Laboratories, Inc. We also have with us Mike Robbins from Gaming Laboratories, Inc. And we may have on the call as well. I think I see Joseph there too as well. Yep, thank you very much. As I said earlier, before everybody started getting on, thank you, Representative Walters, for being on the call. Thank you, Representative Newsom. Let me just kind of double check through things. I don't want to. I think that is it for that. I'm expecting Commissioner Wildcat to join us today. When she gets on, I'll introduce her as well. I want to keep this as free-flowing and as informal as we possibly can so we can get through this in a reasonable amount of time. Also, this is being aired on YouTube, live on YouTube. It is not a commission meeting. We're going to probably just have one commissioner join us today. So it is not a commission meeting. This is a stakeholders meeting. This is an opportunity for stakeholders to jump in and look at the rules, be part of this process. Hopefully we don't take too many hours on this, but there's a lot to go through. And I do want to hear from you all. So whether it's hearing from you here in this meeting or you following up at a later date with me in an email, you're more than welcome. I'm monitoring my emails as the meeting goes. So, you know, feel free to communicate either texting or via emails, and I'll try to respond to you. I guess the first thing is, let's just start out. I think everybody should have received or had the ability to access the rules. I believe we have about 62 pages of rules that I would like to go through today. So looking at chapter 1, and again, like I said, we want to keep this free flowing and informal if we possibly can. So looking at chapter 1. Stakeholders, well, I know, I apologize. Everybody needs to try to introduce themselves. I'm not sure who wants to start. If you, Paul, if you want to jump in, or I see Mark, you know, Clare Johnson, if any of you folks would like to introduce yourselves and who you represent.
Charlie, this is Paul Hickey again. I'm Wyoming counsel for Super Bowl.
Stakeholders, well, I know, I apologize. Everybody needs to try to introduce. Thank you, Paul. Next one.
My name is Dave Pickard. I'm representing DraftKings and FanDuel.
Thank you, sir. Don't be bashful.
This is Neal Tomlinson. I'm representing Golden Entertainment.
Thank you, Neal.
I'm Clare Johnson, and I'm the in-house attorney for the Northern Arapaho Tribe.
Thank you for joining us.
I'm Sandy Newsom, and I represent House District 24 in the Wyoming House of Representatives and sit on the Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife Committee.
Thank you, Representative Newsom.
I'm Tom Walters, representative from House District 38, and I was the prime sponsor on this bill, and so continuing to follow its progress.
Good morning. This is Daniel Schiffer. I'm the governor's liaison to the Wyoming Gaming Commission.
Thank you, Dan. Catherine, you want to introduce yourself? Or Jonathan, come on. Don't
Good
be.
morning, Director. Catherine Wilkinson here today representing Cowboy Skill.
Good morning, Director Moore. Jonathan Downing representing Cowboy Skill.
Thank you.
Good morning. This is Kristin Mackey on behalf of the Superbook, and we have a couple of representatives here in our CEO as well as our compliance director. So there's a few of us here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Mike Moser, Wyoming State Liquor Association.
Chris Cipolla, DraftKings. Nice to meet everybody.
Thank you.
Patrick Willard, National Council on Problem Gambling.
Hi, this is Alex Smith. I'm with FanDuel.
Hi, everyone. This is Daniel Lobo. I'm with Sport Radar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Mehta. I'm with FanDuel as well. Thank you for having us today.
Good morning. This is Marianne Shanor on behalf of 307 Horse Racing.
Well, it looks like everybody's identified them that would like to. I'm going to take one moment and I've got to get a hold of one of my staff members to do something for us here. So I'm going to give me 1 second. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Again, thank you for your time. I do see that Senator Ellis has joined us this morning. Good morning, Senator Ellis.
Good morning, Director Moore.
Thank you very much for taking the time. We also have Representative Newsom on, and we have Representative Walters joining us as well. So I think we've got everybody covered here. So I guess let's just start out on Chapter 1, General Provisions. Again, stakeholders looking at this, we're looking at the definition sections. I guess it's your opportunity, stakeholders, to just, if you see a problem, an issue. Now, one thing we do know, there is formatting issues. There may be some formatting changes that we need to take care of, but you know, the remainder of it, if you just jump in and feel free to express concerns, issues, anything that you do have. Chapter 1.
Director Moore, I have a question.
Yes.
On page 15 in Chapter 3, it says that the operator shall remit electronically 10% of the online sports wagering revenue. And then as I read that, I went back to look at definitions and I didn't see the definition of revenue in the definition. So it was unclear to me what revenue means.
Thank you for that catch. Looking at the definitions here, you are correct. And to kind of help everybody understand as well, what we have done here over the last several years, both governors have had the feeling that to try to minimize our rules. And it is not what we did here, but you will see a lot of the definitions, like on page 2, you'll see cash equivalent. What we have done, we have identified the Wyoming statutes 924-101A1 for that. And we've done that in a little bit of a compromise. Typically, previous governors and even under this current governor is wanting to have less in rules, but it's a little difficult, especially in a new situation that we're dealing with when we're having to look at statutes and rules simultaneously. So thank you for that. We need to put that definition into our definitions, and then we will reference the appropriate statute that identifies that. So.
Director Moore, to further answer Representative Newsom's question, revenue is defined within the legislation. So it's not something that the Gaming Commission will be deciding what is revenue. That's already defined in the bill itself or in the legislation itself. And it's basically net. It's the net is really what we're talking about. It's not gross. It's 10% of net, and I think it talks about minus free plays and promotional plays and a few other things, but it's really in your mind, just think of net.
Okay. Yes, and that is correct. Thank you. It's on page 4 of the Enrolled Act 50. Online sports wagering revenue means the total of all wagers placed by patrons with an online sports wagering operator, so on and so forth. So thank you.
But it should be it should be in the definitions and have that statutory.
Excuse me, I didn't catch that, Representative Newsom.
I'm sorry. I still believe it should be in the definitions.
Yep.
Revenue should be in the definitions with the statutory reference.
Charlie, it's Kevin Mullally. If you look at paragraph S, online sports wagering revenue has a meaning provided in WS 9-24-101A7.
Right.
Page 4 of the chapter. Page 4, chapter 1.
Correct. And what we'll do, we'll move that definition over into our definitions. So make sure we have that in chapter 1.
Thank you.
Moving on to chapter 2. One of the questions that I had here on line 260, and whether it's the stakeholders or if it's Gaming Laboratories Inc. could maybe answer this question for me, is what type of special conditions are happen with sports wagering that are identified in that in F? And maybe that's better a question for either Kevin or Mike Robbins, maybe, or if either one of the stakeholders wants to jump in, DraftKings, FanDuel.
I'm sorry, Charlie, can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, no problem. On in chapter 2, page 9, line number 260, it says special conditions. What type of special conditions arise?
Yeah, so it's a very common provision, and not just in sports wagering or online regulatory structures, but in any regulatory structure, you will have sometimes conditions placed on a license, and it's when a concern arises or they're asking for a special consideration of any kind, you may put conditions around that license that they have to meet. So anything that's not contained in the regulatory structure And you might take into account things like in traditional gaming, it's usually something that's structural in nature or something that's unique to the venue. But in online, it could be types of new technology where you say, we're going to approve this, but we're going to place these conditions on it.
Thank you, Kevin, for that explanation. Again, I would hope we could get some good conversation from our stakeholders, from DraftKings, FanDuel, BetM, whoever wants to jump in. These are your rules, folks.
Director Moore, this is Chris Cipolla from DraftKings, and good to see you. Obviously, as you go through the rules, we'll jump in where we can, just to so that you understand how internally we're reviewing the rules. We have all of our departments going through the process, and we're gathering that feedback. We're not ready to share that today. We will provide you with comprehensive comments as quickly as possible. But that feedback and obviously the regulations touch across many departments. So that process is ongoing. We'll obviously contribute where we can today, but our plan is to follow up with comprehensive feedback, written feedback for your review.
Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate you explaining that. And of course, I know everybody has a pretty good grasp of the timeline we're on as well. Try to get these up, and again, we are hoping we can have a lot of these issues ironed out, if there are any, and be ahead of any concerns or issues that the operators do have, instead of having them come during the public comment later on. We'd like to get it taken care of sooner than later if we can. So,
Director Moore, one other common use of conditions that just came to mind is sometimes you will have an instance where a particular investor or some executive with a company or shareholder with a company is caused some suitability concerns. And it's going to take some time to divest that interest. And so you would approve the license conditional upon them taking care of that suitability issue at a later date. Also, sometimes they are in the process of obtaining some other governmental permit, and it's not anything that would cause a health or safety concern, but it's just going to take some extra time. So you would make a conditional upon them getting that permit or approval within X number of days. Those are also common uses of license conditions.
So that
you don't want to hold up the opening of the operation for something that the commission might be concerned about and want taken care of, but it's not something that's so significant that you would want to hold up the opening of the operation.
Thank you, Kevin. So with what you said there, and I know we're jumping ahead a little bit later on in our chapters, we do have some temporary permits, and I know Colorado does the temporary permitting and different things. So that would kind of fall into that same category. Why would you temporarily permit somebody? Is that what you're?
Yes. Yeah. For instance, let's say you want to launch everybody at the same time, and you have a couple of companies that have things that you want cleaned up, but they're not of such great significance that you would want to either delay everybody or cause significant harm to that particular operator because they would launch later than everyone else. Those are things where you might place conditions on the license.
Thank you.
Director Moore, on page 9, line 253 and 254, it discusses a permit and a permit going to anyone no permit going to anyone less than 16. To be able to wager, you have to be 18. Would it make sense to make sure that the person offering the wagers must also be 18 rather than 16? And is there a legal reason that because it discusses child labor laws of Wyoming, is there a legal reason we have to have that at 16? Otherwise, I think it would make more sense to have it at 18 to conform with the betting patron. And maybe someone else on the call here can offer a reason why it should be 16, but I know there was some concern about the age restrictions, and lowering it to 16 would certainly cause some heartburn.
Thank you, Representative Walters. I appreciate that comment. I'll have our legal advisor look at that and get back with. I think that's a very valid point. So thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to that? Again, thank you, Representative. Moving on, we did talk a little bit on page 13. And if anybody has any questions on 10, 11, and 12, feel free to jump in. We did talk slightly there about the temporary permitting, and I had a note here to see what type of situations we would have with temporary permitting. And I do know that Colorado does quite a bit of temporary permitting.
And that just recognizes the practical constraints of trying to get a whole lot of people licensed in a relatively short period of time. You're not going to be able to achieve that. So you really triage the situation where you're going to run some basic checks, criminal history checks, financial checks. You'll check with other regulatory agencies where they've been licensed. Get yourself some level of comfort that you can issue a temporary permit while you're doing the permanent background investigation.
Okay.
Director Moore, this is Mark Lipparelli from Superbook. On page 11, where you make an exception under Romanet 2 for bank or other licensed lending institution that holds a mortgage or other lien acquired in the ordinary course of business. I have just one general comment. In a lot of jurisdictions, commissions are granted the flexibility or leeway to grant waivers of formal licensing of financing sources where it makes sense. And the way that language is crafted, it's fairly limiting because I'm not sure how it would be a mortgage or other lien. There are, for example, hedge funds, investment funds, retirement funds that may acquire a substantial number of shares in a given applicant. And oftentimes they're probably not the people you're seeking to file for permits. So generally in that section, if you allowed the commission to have waiver authority over anyone who can, prove up their argument for a waiver of having to seek a permit, you may want to have that flexibility as a commission for those kinds of investors that might acquire an investment in these licensees, so that you're not having to, for example, license the California state pension funds or the Wisconsin state pension funds that might invest in some of these entities. So a general waiver provision that puts the burden on the person seeking the waiver from having to seek a permit, and you could cap it at the 15% or some number higher if you feel comfortable with that, as long as they're not controlling or electing a majority of the board of directors, which obviously you would want to probably not grant that such waiver. But I didn't see that waiver provision in the rules.
That's a very valid point. I think it may have gotten caught up in the editing when we're trying to reduce the number of pages of the rules, but we define institutional investor in the definitions. I think it's a simple fix by just adding the already defined term of institutional investor to that language. We would take care of what I think a very valid concern that Mark raised, because you don't want to be in the business where you're having to license pensions funds, or you at least want to give yourself the option to deal with those situations.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Kevin. Made note of that.
And I just, for argument's sake, sometimes people fall between the cracks, and you may want to have the commission have the ability to consider a waiver, because circumstances happen, and sometimes it's in the best interest to not have to force that person to go through the process. But I'll leave that up to you to consider.
Thank you again. So if there's no further comments for chapter 3 or chapter 2, let's move on to chapter 3. On page 15 of chapter 3, are there any comments from anyone here? Hearing none, I guess we can move on to chapter 4. Again, please feel free to jump in if you have any comments, questions, or concerns from anybody on the call.
And this is Mike, and just to give the group some context, in writing these rules, the legislature gave the commission a September 1st deadline in which to promulgate rules. And the legislature also, to make it easier on the commission, suggested going out to other jurisdictions, and such as Colorado and other jurisdictions that have recently done online sports wagering. And so as you see these rules, so what we did is GLI did a bunch of great work going out and identifying various rules in other jurisdictions, identifying those that could be applicable for Wyoming. We worked with GLI, and then Charlie and I went back and forth to try to review other rules in other jurisdictions, and with the legislation in Wyoming in mind. And so we may have instances where something might work better in Wyoming specifically than say another jurisdiction. But what we did try to do is not recreate the wheel on a lot of this stuff. And so you'll see some provisions, maybe the terminology is different. Maybe something works better in other states than in Wyoming. So keep that in mind as well. These are largely taken from other jurisdictions. And, if there's anything we need to do to make them fit Wyoming, your comments are welcome.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you jumping in there. And yes, we pulled from Colorado, Michigan, I believe, Indiana as well, Tennessee, I believe. Yeah, thank you, Mike, for acknowledging that for me, Mike Robbins. I think the majority of the rules were pulled from Michigan and Colorado, Michigan and Colorado. So correct. Then we tried to kind of incorporate the statutory language into this. And again, following up with what Mike had said also, Mike Kaler, is we tried to look at each one of the chapters in each one of the sections and be able to work it back to the statutory authority. And so with that, again, if there's any comments on chapter 4, again, please jump in. I have a comment, I guess. I'll jump in. On page 22, on line 676, confiscated funds. Where typically do confiscated funds go? And we did not identify that.
It varies fairly dramatically with people who are restricted because they are a cheat or associated with organized crime, or in other words, they've just been banned from participating in gambling. the more, and those just usually filter in based on the nuances in state law. A lot of times they'll end up in unclaimed, in various law enforcement funds or other places, just because that's the way they're treated. The more common way is for self-excluded people. And those, the majority view is that those funds go into a problem gambling preventment and treatment fund. But typically you do need statutory authority. So, you know, we were, I think the agreement was we would be silent on it until we could get some guidance from the legislature as far as where they would like those funds to go. But the typical public policy response is that those funds go into towards problem gambling. And the theory behind why the funds are seized is because essentially once you self-exclude, you are ineligible to place a wager, much like a minor. You've designated yourself as somebody who's not able to participate in gambling activities once you self-exclude.
So again, thank you, Kevin. So in regards to that, if it's a criminal case, you know, we know where there is the statutory authority for that money to go somewhere. But if it's in an administrative case or something like that, and again, I may be asking Mike Kaler if he knows of instances with that. This sounds like this has a potential to be something that needs to come back to the legislature again, and if it's the administrative side.
Director Moore and Kevin, to follow up on that question, then we have legislatively designated that they create an account for online sports wagering, they being the commission. And so if those funds reside within that account, then we've also said once that account exceeds, I believe it's 500,000 or $1 million, whatever it is, then it automatically tips to the state's general fund, with the first 300,000 in that account going to address problem gaming issues. And so legislatively, I think we may have already taken care of that question, Director Moore, because that funding would reside in that account until that account reaches its tipping point, and then it would automatically tip to the general fund, whether it be tax revenue that's in that account or suspended play money that's in that account. I don't know that we would delineate that as different funds. I think that would all just be money in the account. And then, like I said, it would tip automatically to the general fund with 300,000 going to the problem gaming up front. But I'd certainly be interested, if after I explain it that way, I would be interested to see, Kevin, what your response might be to that approach, or Director Moore, or even Council Kaler.
With that explanation, I would agree that you've already addressed it. I think it's unlikely that the amount of funds from persons who have self-excluded would exceed 300,000 in a year. I think that would be unusual.
And this is Mike. Yeah, I agree, Representative Walters. I think that that as it stands right now, there is an avenue for a place to direct those funds legislatively. That's kind of how I think when I was going through these rules that I saw it going. Certainly, if, now that we've at least brought it up, if the legislature does want to do something otherwise, then certainly that's up to the legislature. But I think for now, Representative Walters, you're correct.
Thank you for that. Moving on to the remainder of the chapter, are there any questions, concerns from stakeholders or anybody, legislators? Well, hearing none, let's again continue. Chapter 5, Technical Standards.
And Charlie, before we jump on, I was trying to find my mute button. Is there anybody out there, we do have a section in here, section 6, that discusses layoff wagers. Now, it seems to me that that's something that's fairly common in the industry. Is that enough, at least as far as the stakeholders are concerned, to address any concerns that we have to deal with layoff wagers?
Thank you, Mike, for bringing that up. I did have a note to say something about that and I missed it. Thank you. Any of the stakeholders want to jump in on the layoff wagers? That's on page 22, section 6. Or even jump in and explain layoff wagers a little bit. I have an understanding of what a layoff wager is, but there may be some people on the call that don't.
Sure, Director Moore, this is Chris Cipolla. Just at a high level, layoff wagers help operators manage risk. And that's what it's used for. Looking at the rule, I don't believe that there's any issue with how it's written. It seems fine from our perspective, and that's what it's used for, just to help better manage risk.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Is there, and this would be a question for anybody that would want to answer. How many states, let me rephrase it. Is there a state that refuses to allow for layoff wagers?
Indiana actually prohibits them.
Indiana's the only one? Thank you.
And Mike, in Indiana, are you aware of any sort of, kind of public policy concerns as to why they do not allow layoff wagering in Indiana?
I am not aware. No, sorry.
I will make an attempt to answer that question. I'll give them a call this afternoon. Page 24, page 25, 26, 27. On page 27 of this chapter, section 12, the reserve requirements and how that applies. Stakeholders, I mean, do we have a mechanism in place to hear with these rules to deal with the reserve that you're accustomed to? I understand this does seem to. I just kind of wanted to hear from you all your opinion on the reserve requirements. I guess everybody's good with it. Good job, everybody.
And we provided a good deal of flexibility with that, Director Moore, just because to take into account the different ways that operators might approach that and to give the commission decision-making authority. So it provides the industry with some guidance, but gives the commission the flexibility in how those reserves are to be met.
And so a quick question, what of those ways, what's the most common in the industry that the Gaming Commission will probably be seeing as far as form of reserve requirements? Do we know?
This is Chris Cipolla from DraftKings. Just to piggyback on what Kevin said, having flexibility and, from our quick review, and as I mentioned earlier, we do have the broader teams we are collecting feedback from the broader team. So if there are specific issues, we will flag those as quickly as possible. I think that the key to answer your question, Mike, is flexibility. I don't think that there's one consistent way in which, we can say, and I won't speak for other companies, obviously, but having the flexibility to meet the reserve requirement through various methods is appreciated and something we look for, when we're reviewing regulations.
Thank you.
Director Moore, a question for Chris and maybe you, Director Moore. On page 27, lines 853 and 854, we discuss in this reserve the cash equivalent maintained in a Wyoming bank account segregated from the wagering operators' operational funds. Paraphrase that, but really my question is about the Wyoming bank account. If these contests, let's say it's the Super Bowl that we're wagering on, and FanDuel or DraftKings or PointsBet or any of these others are who I place my wager with, the line is based on a national line. The odds are national. So would the account for those funds need to be held, Wyoming's funds need to be held just in a Wyoming account, or would it be held with you corporately, you might say, in your overall reserve account for all wagers placed that day? And again, we're talking about the Super Bowl or any other major national event. And so having it be maintained in a Wyoming bank, while I love the business in Wyoming, really like the idea of the business in Wyoming, will that put undue restrictions on your ability to accept wagers?
This is Alex Smith from FanDuel. I think I can take that one. So we do in all states that we operate sports wagering products in, we do establish an account in a bank that is based in that state. So rather than one national account that has all the customer funds across all of our operating states, we do have individual accounts. So we would have a Wyoming account. We have a bank that has the bank that we use has at least one branch in every state in the country. So that makes it easier for us to have use that national bank that has the ability to create an account in each state that we go into.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the conversations here. Moving on to page 28 or 29. Well, it looks like we're now at chapter 5, the technical standards. I'd like to hear some conversation on this, and as we've referenced GLI 33 and GLI change management. Also on page 32, I did have some comments on the tribal lands. That maybe we have we need to use a different reference to that. But hearing from the stakeholders here today, they're on the call. Your pluses or minuses with referencing GLI 33 and GLI change. Is there anyone that wants to jump in on that at this point?
Director, I can tell you that mirrors what we see in most other states, so no concerns from the FanDuel side.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate that.
Nor from the DraftKings side, Director Moore.
Moving on to page 32, section 3, where we reference the exclusion in the tribal lands. It had been brought to my attention yesterday that we may need to use a different term there. This may take a little more time to kind of sort this out, but instead of excluding tribal land, we may need to look at mirroring the Indian Gaming Act, which references Indian lands. Would anybody like to, on the call, like to jump in on that?
Director Moore, this is Clare Johnson for the Northern Arapaho. We would agree with that the term should mirror Section 2703 of the Indian Gaming Act to
Right.
use the term Indian lands. We would also like, once that switch for Indian lands, to be included in the definition up in Chapter 1. And I also had a question as to why it says unless otherwise approved by the commission. Since the commission would have no jurisdiction over Indian lands, I think that language there is very confusing.
Thank you for your comments. And I do have a strikeout unless otherwise approved by the commission, and wanted to come back and discuss that with legal counsel. So thank you for that. On my copy, I do have that redlined out at this point. I think the initial, well, I know the initial discussion on that was to give some flexibility. If you all maybe wanted some changes in that, or if there was a legislated change that would give the commission the flexibility to that. But the big thing is here, we wanted to get the discussion so we had it right. And it sounds like we've accomplished that. And thank you for that. And
that is true. It would be in case the tribes, let's say for instance, wanted to become a commercial operator and wanted to include tribal lands for some reason. So it just frankly was there to give the commission the flexibility to evaluate requests from stakeholders and allow for to authorize a request that they might make. But
and I do appreciate that. However, under the current legislation, the tribes cannot participate in the state sports betting system. So I don't feel like that language is necessary.
thank you. We've made note of that. I appreciate that. Moving on to, and again, thank you very much for that discussion. 33, 34, and 35. Hearing none, we'll move on to Chapter 6. Chapter 6, Sports Wagering Accounts, page 1. Page number 38, 39, 40, 41.
This is Patrick Willard with the National Council on Problem Gambling. I noticed that you do have the reference to a direct link to the council. I think that, just to make sure that that is not just helpline phone number, but also the ability to text or chat for that function. Also, I'm not sure if this is the right place to talk about it, but you do talk in here about in limits for the accounts, and obviously I think that we want to make sure that individuals are encouraged to set limits, for their accounts so that they don't end up betting more than they intended to. And those limits then should have timelines associated with them, whether it's weekly, daily, whatever, but a way to incentivize those as a default option that the operators would offer to people when they set up their accounts.
Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate those comments. Where in this was it, as far as where we referenced the National Council? Was it in this chapter?
Yes, it's under.
What page number?
It is on page 41.
Okay,
it is under
thank you.
the Patron Protection Information, section 4.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we had that right and note that correctly. Moving on, page 42. 43. 44 is where we have the responsible gambling limits. $45, $46, page 47, all right, well, let's move on to, and at any point when we get to the end here or at any spot, if you have a comment, we need to move back through the chapters, that's fine too. Again, we intend to have a free-flowing conversation here if we can.
And Director, just to echo what Chris from DraftKings said, on the FanDuel side, we do have multiple teams engaged in reviewing the draft. We do have comments. We're just, we have a process where those are all reviewed internally and signed off on by our exec team. So we'll share those with you as soon as we can, but just at this moment, we'd prefer to do those in writing.
Correct, and I understand that, and with that bearing in mind the timeline that we are under, as soon as we can get those back, that will help us immensely.
Absolutely, understood.
For this.
Of course.
So thank you. Chapter 7, Audit and Internal Controls. Page 49, 50. I have a question on 51 on the emergency procedures. So typically, what would be an emergency, considered emergency situation? And this would be for stakeholders, I believe. Or Kevin, if you want to jump in. Excuse me.
Yeah, again, this just gives the commission the ability to have some flexibility with regard to internal control changes that they want to implement immediately. Sometimes a change in technology, an event might spark the need to have either a variance or a waiver or some type of immediate change to an internal control. The failure to do so might create more risk than the ability to rush it through. And so it just gives the commission the problem solving ability. One of my mentors that teaches risk control at the Kennedy School at Harvard says what regulators do is pick important problems and solve them. And this gives the commission the ability to do that.
Thank you for that. I had also, as going through these, I came back and I thought that maybe 3 days might be a little too much time for an emergency situation and notify the commission of that. And I had shortened that down. I don't know how that works for the operators, but I was thinking that 24 hours might be, if it's an emergency, I would think that you would be able to pick up the phone and let us know and communicate with us. It is a fast-paced industry, so 3 days may be a little too much, but again, we can have some more discussion on that at a later date on this.
Director Moore, in pondering your question, the 3 days, if it occurs on a Saturday, and while not all of the appropriate folks within each organization may have your personal cell phone to call you on a Saturday or a Sunday, that would allow them to get to the first business day being Monday from the event. And so that gives them 3 days. Or if you had a holiday weekend or something like that. So that might be the reason for the 3 days, is just knowing that typical office hours. And like I said, not everyone may have your personal cell phone number, and you may not want to a personal call on Christmas morning just to meet a 24-hour deadline or something. So food for thought. Certainly understand your concern as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And again, I appreciate that. You know, for a lot of us here, this is a 24-hour a day, 7 days a week kind of a thing. So, you know, I feel for that. So thank you. We can relook at that again and maybe go ahead and keep the 3 days. On the next page, I know that we did have a little bit of changes here, and this was suggested by GLI, just some corrections on the internal controls. And for those of you that don't have the changes that we received, I'll just read it for you. The internal, it's on line 636, or no, excuse me, 1636. We struck prior to commencing online sports wagering operations and annually thereafter. That language was struck. We added then on an annual basis, sports wagering operators, sports wagering vendors shall have their internal control procedures audited by an independent entity recognized, and then struck the remainder of that line to the commission. Then we added C down there, and again, I'll shoot these copies out to everybody. The commission will post the names of the independent entities approved to conduct these audits on its website, and also we added B, sports wagering operators or sports wagering vendors can seek recognition of an alternative independent entity for use in completing this audit by submitting a written request to the commission. The director will review the qualifications and experience of the independent entity and determine whether to recognize that entity. So we did add that language. Then moving on to Section 8, accounting records. I did have a question from one of my commissioners. What is standard for keeping records in the sports wagering world? I know we didn't note that, how long to keep the records, how long they had to be required, or what is standard operating procedures, and is it even necessary to worry about that?
Director, I'd say we've seen 3 to 5 years. It is standard.
That's what I would assume would be.
And what, you know, again, Director, we will submit written comments, but just to preview one on the internal control audit, that's a requirement that we've not seen in another mobile gaming jurisdiction so far. So we will want to work with you on exactly what that looks like. We won't have gone through that sort of process prior to this.
No problem. We will get that to you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Moving on, page 53, 54, 55. Any questions, concerns, issues at this point? Hearing none, we can go on to Chapter 8, Responsible Gambling and Advertising. Section 1, we have the Responsible Gambling Plan to be submitted to the Commission. Section 2, Self-Exclusion Program. Section 3, Involuntary Exclusion List. Section 4, sports wagering operator and sports wagering vendor responsibilities. And Section 5, advertising. Any questions, any concerns with that? Moving on to Chapter 9, disciplinary actions and hearings. The authority is Section 1, Section 2 is the purpose, and then Section 3, contested case proceedings, and we're incorporating by reference the SOS rules, and incorporating that all, the contested case practice and procedures. Any questions on any of that? Well, I had blocked off more time for this, but again, I understand that a lot of you have been poring over this, and thank you very much. Is there anything that you would like to, anybody on the call would like to follow up with, and just make any comments generally or otherwise? Please feel free to jump in.
Director, this is Dave Pickard.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Director, could you go over the timeline again for the benefit of everybody on the call? And then a specific question, when we get into the formal rulemaking process, will that be concurrent with accepting applications leading up to a go live date?
Thank you again for your questions. Your latter question, we have not actually contemplated that at this point. We will be, and thank you for that question. It was asked of me yesterday as well. Again, I think as conversations you've had with me, is my main focus has been getting the rules stood up and then moving on to the second phase of this, which is the licensing and all of that as well. So thank you, and we will keep you all posted on that. The timeline. With the September 1st deadline, what I did, for everybody that's on the call, just to remind you, I took the September 1 deadline and I walked everything backwards to where we are today. So I took the 45-day comment period. I took the different situations where the governor has so many days to contemplate and sign the regulations into law, to the 10 days the governor has as well, to the amount of time it takes with the AG's office. So right now we are on track, and we're right where I would like it to be. The hopeful side of me would be to put our heads together this coming Friday and work long and very diligently on having a product that is ready to be moved over and go towards the governor's office. But I also understand it takes time for all of you to put together your comments and your questions. So I also know there's a little bit of a reality check for our agency that may not happen. So with that being said, I'm hoping that on Friday, the 14th this week, we can work through the rules. We can discuss a lot of the rules with the commission. If we had comments it would sure be nice to walk out of that meeting with the rules ready to go to the governor's office. If that does not happen, of course, we can reschedule additional meetings, but then my drop dead date is the rules hopefully would be on the governor's desk by June 1st. And then he would return those to us and we could start public comment as soon as possible. And that would, June 1st, going into public comment without any additional, I don't know if pushback is the right word to say, it's probably not, but if everything would go smoothly, that would mean we would be able to hit that September 1 date. So I hope that answered the question. If there's any specifics on that you'd like to know a little more, We also have on our website, not only do we have the rules, and there'll be an updated version of the rules on the website, and we'll send them out to you individually as well, but we have the timeline and we have the legislation on the website as well. If you click on the sports wagering tab, it's all right there for you to look at and see. And again, please pick up the phone, contact myself, contact my senior agent, Nick Laramende, and we could sure get back with you as quickly as we possibly can.
Director Moore, following up on your answer, just to make sure I'm clear, the public comment would start sometime in June following the governor's office review, but you are certainly open and welcoming any comments, suggestions, and feedback today or between now and that time from the stakeholders involved in today's meeting or any other stakeholder that would like to provide it. You're not holding off for suggestions until that formal public comment. You are welcoming those today, correct?
Thank you, Representative Walters, for that. Yes, absolutely. We have been taking public comment since the bill passed and encouraging that. We encourage public comment. We also very much encourage comments during the 45-day public comment, and the governor will as well when he has his period, I'm sure as well too. I can't speak for the governor, but I know they're open for comments. So yes, to your question, anytime, anywhere, in any format as well.
Director Moore, moving to a different subject briefly, going back to page 46 of the rules, and some of the vendors might be able to answer this, and it's really about the dormant sports wagering accounts. And it says it goes dormant 3 years, after 3 years, and then you'll return the money to the patron. If the patron is unable to be found, they've moved multiple times, or who knows what the situation is, would that funding then go to the state of Wyoming, to our unclaimed properties division? Is like if you have a bank account in Wyoming and the bank closes or something and they can't find you, that's where it goes. And we have about 80 or 90 million in unclaimed property here within the state, but it retains their name but sits in the state's unclaimed property account. Or how do companies handle that in the event they can't find the person?
Would one of the vendors want to, or operators want to jump in on that one? Thank you.
Representative, I'm happy to try to answer the question and can get more detail. I believe it varies by state, by the state law. If there is an unclaimed funds law in the state, the expectation is that it would go to the unclaimed funds account that's created by the state, but it does vary by state.
So then following up, and Councilor Kaler or Kevin, do we need to make a note of that in the event the patron cannot be identified, that will follow state statute and it will go to the unclaimed property?
We certainly can. It was our anticipation when writing this that it would follow the state unclaimed property process. I don't feel like we felt that, again, we were trying to balance giving the industry direction without, creating 150 pages of rules. So certainly a line to that effect would not hurt. It would give the industry some direction.
And just to add on to that, we do typically, that will be included in our internal controls that are submitted that you all review. So we do address this in our internal controls.
And thank you, Chris, for that, because that's exactly right. The internal controls are kind of it's the real meat and potatoes of how the mechanism works, from what I understand. So thank you.
And Director Moore, just jumping back to, obviously as we stated, we'll be submitting written comments, but just to share our timeline and what we're working internally. And we understand the urgency and the tight timeline that you all are on and what's going into this. We believe that we can have comprehensive feedback to you, written feedback by the end of next week. So Thursday or Friday of next week, 20th, 21st. And that's our goal.
Thank you for that. Mike Kaler, did you want to comment?
No, I was just going to chime in to kind of tag on to what Representative Walters had to say. Yeah, certainly, even if it's not mentioned in the rules, the operators will have to abide by Wyoming state laws with respect to unclaimed property. We will look to see if there's kind of a general statement that we can put in there that, make sure that requires that they comply with all state laws with respect to unclaimed property. We can see if we can include something in there, but we'll take a look at that and see if there's a way we can do it without clumsily putting it in there to cause problems. But we'll take a look for certain. And Kevin and Mike, do you know, with respect to other states that we've looked at, do they usually call that out in rules, or do they just stay silent in that and then just kind of require folks to be aware of their own state jurisdiction requirements?
You see it both ways, and it's really a strategic decision. I mean, I think the way we left it is that we would leave it out because sometimes state unclaimed property laws change, and we feared that you might end up with a conflict between the rules and changes in the state unclaimed property rules, and we just left it to it's the operator's responsibility, and it'll say in their license that you have to abide by all state, federal, local regulations is one of your conditions of your license. And so there's a lot of things they have to do that aren't necessarily contained in the rules. But having said that, there's certain, I think you artfully hit on the issue. Can we put it in a way that calls it to their attention without putting in any specific steps that need to be taken so that if the law does change, that the rules aren't in conflict? In both ways, I would say a minority of states mention it in the rules, but it's certainly not unheard of.
And Representative Walters, we will take a look at that and see if there's a good way to include that without causing any issues in the rules or the process.
Well, I think Kevin answers it best. If there's just kind of in their permit a general provision that says you'll follow all Wyoming laws, whether it be for unclaimed property or anything else, then it's in their permit, it's covered saying, please check our Wyoming laws to make sure you're doing things appropriately. And it doesn't necessarily need called out. Just noticed that and was curious how it was handled across the industry. And it sounds like it's taken care of both internally and then through other forms within the permit, that it doesn't need to be called out specifically here.
Yeah. Yeah, the way the permitting process will work, the way we're envisioning it is, there'll be a commission resolution that'll say, whereas, this entity has applied for a license, and whereas they presented the following information, whereas the statute requires that they meet these things, whereas they've demonstrated that, and now therefore they're granted a license, and then they'll say conditional on certain things. And that's where those licensing conditions come in. But a very common one is that you maintain all required permits, and you are in compliance with all federal, state, and local laws at all times.
That seems like a pretty simple catch-all that covers the bases on that one, especially knowing that industry-wide they do it internally based on what each state requires. It sounds like it's already contemplated. And so thank you for the discussion. Thank you for the time.
Well, again, thank you. Chris, did you have a comment?
Just one more, Director Moore, and it will be included in our written feedback, but one suggestion that we have, there is a rule in the Colorado sports wagering regulations, I believe it's 6.2, that specifically deals with pools wagering. We would suggest that a rule similar to Colorado, if not, identical, with terminology changing obviously as needed by statute, that something similar be incorporated into the Wyoming regulations. But we will submit that in writing as well, with a justification for why we think it's important.
Thank you.
Now, and you say pools wagering, are you speaking like kind of pari-mutuel pools or other types of pools within sports betting?
Not pari-mutuel pools, but they're fixed pools. Think March Madness bracket, that sort of thing, where you submit an entry fee, and it's essentially a contest that is offered to the customers. I do believe pools is specifically identified as a permitted wagering type in the statute. It is an offering that we offer in jurisdictions throughout the country, and would like to offer it in Wyoming as well.
Yeah, thank you. And if you could just reference kind of the Colorado rule, we can take a look at that and then and do a review. Thank you.
And section 7 of chapter 4 start talking about tournaments and contests. So maybe if they're, if your suggested wording can be integrated there, page 22 of the document, does talk about contests and tournaments. So pools could fall into that potentially.
I do believe Colorado did something similar where they addressed that section. So in our feedback, we'll absolutely look to incorporate it into that section. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Any additional comments, questions, concerns?
One question that I have to go back to I think Representative Walters had the question about 16 years and older. Now, in other jurisdictions, like I had said at the outset, we've been pulling from other jurisdictions. And so this may be a question for Kevin or Mike. Generally speaking, was that, something that, for permitting, say the dishwasher at the sports book or something like that, so that we don't prohibit, somebody from employing somebody who's otherwise able to be employed under state and federal law? Or are there jurisdictions out there that actually allow 16-year-olds to be, kind of like an occupational permit or a key employee permit or something like that? What is that 16-year-old provision used for in other states?
You've hit on it, and I think the decision here was to provide the commission with maximum flexibility and decision-making authority. But the nature of the Wyoming Act, with it primarily being online only, I think those types of jobs are probably more limited than you would see in a land-based jurisdiction. But I thought, why hamstring things in the rules? Let's give the commission the ability to consider somebody that might fall into a job category. There are a lot of technical positions that for somebody might be very bright at 16 and might have a role in a technology position that might need to be permitted. And so we didn't see any. We thought we'd open with the 16, and if there was concern, you can always raise it.
All right. Yeah, thank you. We'll take a look at that rule.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Again, I appreciate everyone's time. Appreciate the free-flowing kind of an environment we had here today. Thank you. And we'll keep you all posted on the next stakeholders. We do have a meeting on Friday, the 14th, here in Casper. It will be with Zoom capabilities. We'll be discussing the rules in front of the commission. So please join us. And again, if you have questions, public comment, anything, please reach out to me via email, phone, or whatever, and I'll make every effort to discuss those with you as quickly as possible. Thank you. So I guess with no additional comments, we're good. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Director.
Good day.
Have a great day, Director Moore. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great day.
Thanks.